Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Quiero agradecerles por la participación en este webinar. En el día de hoy, junto con el doctor Terramani, doctor especialista vascular y miembro de la Asociación Vascular de San Diego de Estados Unidos, quien va a dar una charla sobre abordaje universal, y el doctor Ricardo Janeiro, de aquí de Argentina, quien va a hablar básicamente del abordaje anterior de la LIF. En este caso, la presentación la empieza el doctor Tom Terramani. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Please, Doc.
Gracias. And you're going to give me control, share screen, desktop share.
Quiero aclararle a todos, perdón, doctor, que si alguna tiene algún tipo de pregunta, al final de cada presentación, los doctores las van a estar respondiendo. Así se hace un poco más dinámica la presentación en sí. Thank you, Doc. It's okay.
So I speak a little bit Spanish, a little bit of Italian, but I'm going to speak English. That's my easiest language to communicate. What my topic is really focusing in on anterior spine surgery and the various corridors to the spine and how the retractor system that the TSI TDAN Phantom system provides. The key points of the presentation are going to be the role of the approach surgeon, a little brief history of spine surgery and also the corridors, the tools needed for success. We're going to talk about 8 different types of cases, and we're going to just barely touch the surface of complications. I'm not going to really get into the details of the anterior technique because I would be talking for maybe 3 hours, and that would probably bore you guys. That is an unfortunate event. You know, one thing I found on Zoom is comedy doesn't work as well, but I have to put a little comedy in my presentations. And so this is a board meeting. And this is when you ask your wife asks you a question if she's gained any weight, and the husband said you were never skinny in the first place. That's considered a COVID death in America. So some disclosures. I work with a number of spine companies. Most of it is education, but I have kind of branched out and helping in design of implants and delivery through MIS techniques. So in my opinion, the role of the spine surgeon, he's part of the team. He's part of this, or the role of the access surgeon. He's part of the spine team. Really the goal of the access and the approach surgeon is to do safe, timely, so very quick, a reproducible midline approach to the spine. Also, it's critical that you're able to identify, minimize, and deal with complications. And you really need to understand what the spine surgeon needs. If you don't understand what the spine surgeon needs, then you're not really part of the team. And you have to have a real good knowledge of spine anatomy, vascular anatomy, or urologic anatomy. So what I consider the responsibilities of an approach surgeon may be different than what other people across the country or across the world. But I think it's important that you're involved in the decision-making. Is this patient a good candidate for anterior spine exposure or oblique or lateral? You evaluate all the films. You decide where the incision needs to be. You're aware of the specifics of the device that are going to be used. You're going to make sure you're monitoring perfusion of the left lower extremity. You want to make sure the patient's paralyzed when you're doing your operation. You don't want them moving on the table. You're going to protect predominantly vascular urologic structures, but sometimes you have to make sure you're protecting GI structures. And you want to share your concerns if any vascular structures are under undue tension with your spine surgeon. I'm a vascular surgeon. I think vascular surgeons today in America are probably the best positioned specialty to take care of retroperitoneal space, to take care of blood vessels, and to do the approach. I think general surgeons 10 years ago, 15 years ago were better trained in vascular. Today in America, at least, most general surgeons do not get a lot of vascular experience. And I think if you don't have a lot of vascular experience and know how to deal with blood vessels, you probably should not be doing this approach. So real brief history. ALIFs have been around longer than any other approach. So anterior approaches, long time. First transabdominal, then it was retroperitoneal about 40 years later. Then T-lift or P-lift started coming around. T-lifts came around. Then the MIS A-lift technique came around in the latter part of the 90s. Sal Brow really pushed it in early 2000s in Los Angeles, California. Then X-lift came around. O-lift came around in 2012. And a new technique, which we're starting to do, is the supine oblique approach, or supine ATP. The evolution has happened in the anterior space really by changing where you put your incision. We used to do it flank, now we do it midline. We used to do transabdominal, now we do retroperitoneal. We used to make big incisions, now we make small incisions. In my opinion, today's ALIF is MIS. And when I think of MIS, that means I don't destroy anything. I do it quickly. Just about 15 minutes ago, I did an ALIF at 4-5, 45 minutes, skin to skin. And patient's gonna go home tomorrow. The instrumentation for ALIFs and artificial disc have improved. The access surgeons, spine surgeons have better understanding of the spine anatomy and the vascular anatomy. The dogma of proximal distal control is gone. We don't suture blood vessels anymore. Rarely, we use hemostatic agents. And so those are big deals that have changed the quality of anterior spine surgery. This is probably the pinnacle article. If you're in this world of anterior spine surgery, you probably should read this. And Sal Brow is now retired, but he had a very big impact on anterior spine surgery. But there is always that question is, what's the best corridor to the spine? And there's some good studies out there now. And I think anterior spine surgery is going to be positioned such that it is the best approach to the spine to reestablish sagittal alignment, get the lordosis that you want, you get the best, largest implants, but there's a lot of different corridors to the spine. The ones I'm going to focus in on are anterior, oblique, and then your direct lateral. What are the corridors that are best suited for anterior, lateral, or oblique? And there's a lot of factors that come into play. This slide just shows some of the issues that go through my mind: obesity, previous abdominal surgery down in the lower quadrants, previous retroperitoneal surgery in the middle, a previous aortic aneurysm, previous spine surgeries, osteophytes, transitional anatomy. Those are all issues that cross your mind when you're deciding what is the safest approach. And that teamwork with the spine surgeon is where you decide the best approach is. So are there any shortcomings to anterior spine surgery? I say no, but that's just my opinion, but there are. You have to have an approach surgeon in most parts of the world. I mean, there are places in the world that the spine surgeon does the approach, and they do a great job. I don't think you have to be a vascular surgeon or a general surgeon. You could be a neurosurgeon or an orthopedic surgeon, as long as you can deal with moving structures off the anterior aspect of the spine. So in America, most of the time, 90% of the time, there's a spine surgeon and an approach surgeon. So there's scheduling issues. There's blood vessels that can be damaged. And if you don't know how to deal with that, they're disasters. Some people say retroperitoneal ejaculation or retrograde ejaculation is an issue. I think there's a lot of misconceptions on that. I don't think it's an issue if you know what the hell you're doing. Some of the patients can't be done anterior only, and so they need posterior fixation. So sometimes some spine surgeons say, I'll do everything posterior. And then there's an income issue. At least here in America, we share the pot, sort of kind of the income that is generated from the case. So I'm not going to get into this slide, but it shows all the pros of anterior. So ALIF is anterior, direct lateral is LLIF, and ATP is either supine ATP or direct lateral ATP. And in my opinion, and I'll debate this with anybody, I think anterior spine surgery has the most positives. They're not all positive, but has the most positives. What's the most common operation done in America? This is some SpineTracks data. There's no question that minimally invasive TLIF or open TLIF is the most common operation that is done. Lateral surgery has increased a little bit over the last 5 years up to 2020. Anterior spine surgery has kind of stayed stable. Artificial disc really hasn't changed, hasn't really grown much. So there is definitely more posterior spine surgery being done than anterior spine surgery. Why? Well, there's not enough anterior access surgeons that really embrace it and want to do it. So that's a bottleneck. Another issue is my spine guy is too slow. I don't want to sit in the OR for 3 hours and watch the spine guy pick out a disc space. Hell, I'm not going to waste my time. Or spine guy says, I don't want to share my income with the access surgeon. I'm just going to do it all posterior. Or the spine access surgeon's really slow and takes 3 hours to do an L5S1. The spine surgeon's not going to do the operation if you can't do expeditious approaches. Then there's the issue of scheduling, coordinating two surgeons. There's also the issue of insurance, sometimes won't reimburse for anterior spine surgery. Some spine surgeons never even have done an anterior spine operation in their fellowship. So they come out in private practice or academics and not trained to do anterior spine restoration. Some spine surgeons think they can do everything posterior, which they're basically either smoking crack or smoking too much marijuana, because I don't think you can establish lordosis like you can do laterally or anteriorly in the posterior column. And then some spine surgeons want to do everything posterior because they're there anyways putting in screws. Lastly, you got to sometimes wait for the access surgeon to show up, or there's delay. So there's an issue with scheduling. There's an issue with a case being too bloody or too many complications that kind of frighten some spine surgeons, and you really shouldn't have high complications rate. So this slide here is an actual page that I give patients when I see them in the office. And why is my spine surgeon going anterior? And there's a lot. These are all great reasons. You don't damage any muscle. Now we're just talking standalone anterior or artificial disc. Don't damage any muscle. Fast operation, 45 minutes to 60 minutes for a single level. Our average X-ray time is 10 seconds. Minimal blood loss, usually 25 cc's for an ALIF, any of the levels. I consider it MIS, almost a near complete discectomy. Right here in the my upper right quadrant, looking at it, is disc space that was removed from the canal. So you can do direct decompression. You can do indirect decompression by putting large cages. You can control lordosis anywhere from 5 to 30 degrees. Extremely high fusion rates, a lot of variability of what you can do, artificial disc, fusion, corpectomies. And we're now doing a lot of these operations on a 23-hour stay basis. But you need the right tools. The tools are imaging, room setup, retractors, monitoring appropriately, and knowing how to deal with blood vessels and issues. I'm not going to get into a lot of details, but this is kind of my setup. I always keep the patient flat, no bumps. That tray right there is all I need. I use 2 Goulet retractor handhelds. I don't do Richardsons. I don't do Reno blades. I don't need any of that. A sponge stick Kittner, a couple Kellys, some DeBakey pickups, and I keep the patient paralyzed. I monitor pulse oximetry on the left lower extremity. I do not use Cell Saver. And I like these Silver Glide bipolars because they don't have tissue that sticks at the end. I always look at the Foley catheter at the beginning of the case and at the end of the case to confirm no ureter injury, as well as look at the ureter at the beginning of the case and at the end of the case directly. This is all old school, a bunch of retractors. If you're using this kind of stuff on approach work, maybe your hospital doesn't have up-to-date retractor systems, but this is Stone Age. You're not going to be able to do quick, safe, reliable anterior spine surgery with these retractors. And there are a lot of different retractors on the market. These are a couple examples. My favorite is TDAN. I have worked with TDAN for a number of years, but I have worked with NuVasive. This retractor here that's made of carbon fiber, I helped design that. Down here below that is Globus's retractor. I helped design that. So there are good retractors out there, but I think TDAN out of all these 5 provide the most bang for your buck. So TDAN retractor, why do I like it? Because it has a lot of flexibility. My workflow is a lot quicker because of what I could do. It has 2-point fixation. I have a lot of different blade selections. I have hinges that I can use for basically looking or working in the lateral space or in the oblique space. Now, this part of the presentation, I just give it to you guys, but I'm not going to talk about this. This is the way I view, in my world, the 5 steps to approach the spine. So I decide where I'm going to make my incision. Then I got to develop the retroperitoneal space. And then I got to move blood vessels off the anterior aspect of the spine, which I call release and rotate, not proximal distal control. I don't use umbilical tape. I don't dissect a lot. I just release vessels and then move them off the spine. And once you do that, you have to establish a safe corridor, and that's where your retractor system comes into play. And then it's cleanup time. Make sure everything's okay, inspect the ureter, inspect the blood vessels, and then do your closure. So we're not going to go through those steps. If people have questions, particulars about any of the 5 steps, I'd be happy to answer those. So I'm just going to jump into some cases. So case 1, standalone ALIF, 5-centimeter incision, 3-screw system, no complications, 10-minute exposure, out of the OR in 1 hour, implant right in the middle. That's how a safe, expeditious, and reproducible case should be. And I call it MIS. My TLIF surgeons get all pissed off that I put that, and I make sure they put that on the board so everybody can see this is MIS ALIF, because it truly is MIS. This patient goes home the next day. Second case is a hybrid case, artificial disc at 4.5, ALIF at 5.1, vertical incision, that is same size, about 5 centimeters, exposure 20 minutes, skin to skin was about an hour and a half, implants midline. Consider that MIS. Here's a 3-level case. Now this is a front and back. You don't see the posterior hardware because I leave right when I'm done with the front case. So I rarely have all the posterior hardware in place when I take pictures. But my incision is below the belly button. The approach was 30 minutes. All these implants are basically in the middle. And this is a Globus cage with anchors. So these cages going nice and quick. And so this was probably close to a 2-hour operation. Next case is a 4-level case. People say, I can't believe you're doing 4 levels anteriorly. Well, you could do it. I don't do it anymore. I do 2 levels anterior and 2 levels oblique. This was just to illustrate the power of the ALIF. You can basically correct a lot of the scoliosis with fusion cages anteriorly, but it's a big incision. And I think when we now have moved to the point where we're using a small incision for 4.5 and a small incision for 2.3.3.4 obliquely in the supine position, and it's a little bit less dissection and a little bit less strain on the fascia. Again, exposure 35 minutes. This is probably a 3-hour operation in total. Now, this is a L3-4 direct look lateral. So I got about 22 spine surgeons I work with. I expose for 2 of the spine surgeons in their lateral surgery. They don't want to deal with it. So I do direct look. I don't do dilators. I just go to the psoas muscle. I use the TDAM retractor with a hinge. So you can see on that picture where my hands are crossed, there's a hinge in between the ring. And that allows me to cup the aspect of the lateral torso. And I use 2 25-millimeter blades and usually 2 15-millimeter blades. In this picture, I have 3 15-millimeter blades and 1 25-millimeter blades. And this is a Globus cage, standalone cage. And our incision is probably 4 centimeters. And this was a guy, I wasn't going to do an ALIF on this gigantic patient at 3.4, but I'm happy to do a lateral exposure. So this is one of the first cases. I don't think many people in the world have done this. So I did a lateral. This is with NuVasive's system, the retractor system. You can tell it's NuVasive right here on this picture on the right lower quadrant. That's a graphite, or excuse me, carbon fiber. So I marked my incision here. I put the patient lateral. I put some posterior boasters. Those are Inomet hip boasters. I made my incision minimal, midline, and I just approached the spine right down the middle. It was hard. I don't recommend doing it. I don't do it anymore because the fat is even more difficult when you put the patient lateral. But we were able to get 3 screws in, and we were able to do this as a standalone case. So it can be possible. This is not an OLIF. It's a little bit different. OLIF, you're going to come out more obliquely and not direct lateral in your incision, or direct medial midline in your incision. Now, this is something that I've coined the term supine ATP. And supine ATP is basically working in that lateral corridor. This is a case that I tried. You see this picture here with the Steri-Strip. So I tried to do an ALIF retroperitoneal. This patient had multiple previous abdominal surgeries. I couldn't get in the retroperitoneal space. So my second algorithm is to try, transabdominal. When I got in transabdominal, there was just a gigantic amount of adhesions. Couldn't do it. So then I switched over to keeping the patient supine. I made an oblique incision, tilted the table 25 degrees. You can see this picture with the retractor blades. I have a hinge and the spine surgeon's on the left side of the patient working in this oblique corridor. We put 2 NuVasive cages at 35-degree insertion points, but we can only put in 1 screw. But this patient was going to be a front back anyway, so we were able to move along with the posterior part at that point. So that is the supine ATP, and utilizing the same retractor system, but placing a hinge. You can do corpectomies anteriorly. This is an L4 corpectomy. And this is kind of illustrating what I talked about when I said 4-level ALIF. I don't do 4-level ALIFs anymore. So this is a patient that had a previous lateral fusion XLIF at L3445 and had adjacent disc disease above and below. So my first part, patient prepped in the same setting. I did the ALIF of 5S1. Then I changed my retractor blade. I buckled it around the side of the patient. I turned the patient 25 degrees, and I approached L2-3 in the oblique corridor, placed a spinal elements cage obliquely, and 1 screw. So that patient had everything fusion done anteriorly. Then they flipped that patient and put screws in posteriorly. So what was the goal of that patient? Reduce a position change. So I'll call that single position surgery from the standpoint of fusion. And those are our cases that we're going to talk about. And having 2 daughters and the bikinis that they're wearing, I'm convinced this is the explanation for global warming. I'm not going to talk about all these access-related complications. I don't know if you guys are going to have access to the presentation, but this is a really encompassing list of, as an approach surgeon, you need to be able to manage all these problems and be able to be aware of these problems. The factors that influence the increased incidence of those complications are all these factors. 4 or 5, there's more vascular injury. Obesity, more problems. History of peripheral vascular disease, inflammation, osteophytes, spondylolisthesis, transitional anatomy. These are all things that have been associated with more vascular problems. And if you're an approach surgeon in the early part of your career, you're gonna get into trouble when you do these cases, and ultimately you're gonna have to do them. But these are the type of issues that are going to increase your complications. So 3% is what I say. If you're looking at your data and you're having higher than 3% complication rate, you need to go back and really study what you're doing. You shouldn't have more than 3% complication rate. These are some articles that kind of illustrate that. Look at some meta-analysis and look at historical complications. This is a slide of my data, kind of my historical data up to 2019. I wasn't doing a ton of anterior spine surgery in the first 5 years of my practice, but in the last 5 years of practice, I pretty much do predominantly anterior spine surgery. I do very little vascular surgery now. So it has an impact on my practice, but I'm doing something I enjoy doing and I do it well, so I keep going. But just to kind of give you a flavor of what my complication rate was in my first 5 years, my first 350 patients, it's not bad. I had almost 1% arterial complication rate, 2% major venous complication rate. So I'm below 3%. That was good. I didn't board any cases, but I was more selective in the beginning. I would say no to cases that I thought I was going to get into trouble. No retrograde ejaculation. That's some pretty good data. If you look at my last 5 years, I'm taking care of more spine surgeons. I'm doing about 400 to 500 cases a year. My arterial complication rate is 0.2%. My major venous complication, 0.3. So I got it down to 0.5. And I abort 3 cases out of all these. And that's probably because I don't say no much anymore. So I end up, every once in a while, I have a case that I can't bring to completion. But again, retrograde ejaculation, 1 patient out of that number. When people say they're having a lot of retrograde ejaculation or postoperative ileus, I don't get it. They're doing something wrong if they're seeing that much of a complication rate. So complications, what impacts them is, and what made it less, is going from transperitoneal to retroperitoneal, improved instrumentation, better retractors, better hemostatic agents, and maybe to a certain extent, picking patients more carefully. These are all the vascular structures you should be aware of. if you're an approach surgeon watching this presentation and you say, "Ooh, I never even seen that vessel," then you're not doing a lot of these cases, or you don't know where that vessel's at. But these are vessels you will encounter. You really need to understand anatomy. I look at the CT scan and MRI, I scan through it. I'm looking for anomalies. I'm looking for osteophytes. I'm looking for duplicated IVCs. All that stuff you should pick up before you make an incision on the patient. There's also anomalies of the urologic system. So, and there's also anomalies of the spine. So transitional anatomy you need to be aware of. The pearls of reducing vascular injury. I could spend 20 minutes on this. I leave this here for you guys to talk about if you want to talk about it after. But these are the steps, I think, how you reduce your vascular complication rate from 3% to 0.5% is really embracing all these issues. One big thing for arterial problems is I always have a pulse oximeter on the left lower extremity, and it's a good pulse oximeter. This is an example, nice waveform. I have the retractors on a little bit. My waveform goes down. Now I have flat line. Am I going to panic? No. I increase systolic blood pressure. That doesn't help. I release my retractor after about 10 minutes. But at the end of the case, I want it to look like it does towards the left. It has to have the same wave pattern. It has to be 100%. Hemostatic agents are awesome today. I rarely will use a Prolene suture to fix a hole. So this is Fibular, Tacloseals from Baxter, Fibulars from Cordis J&J. These are like, I don't open Tacloseal or Everest, which is another very hardcore hemostatic, but every case I have one pack of Fibular open and I use that during the case. Some tunnel vision stuff and things to be aware of. You know, just make sure your spine surgeons realize, hey, the disc is important, but all this stuff up here is important. And here's an example. Don't just look at the end of the tunnel. You don't want to be towing against the top of the retractor blades. You don't want to be towing against the bottom. You don't want to get your Kerrison clipping willy-nilly down here because a vessel may pop out and they don't really see it and they clip into the vessel. You also, when you put the implants and the trials in, you want to make sure that vessel is out of the way. Especially when they're banging on the spine, the vessels sometimes will pop out. So those are things that can happen. These are the things, how you master the approach to the spine. There's a lot here, stuff we can discuss at the end. How does TSI, TDAN facilitate training and help you guys? They provide a great retractor system. Picking the right blades, understanding how to use the retractor system and rotating the system and the blades, the application for different corridors. And as more and more as the educational process goes more Zoom, I'm sure there's going to be more educational stuff that we'll be doing with seminars and videos illustrating how we do this. So spine surgery is a team operation. I knew this would get the attention of some Argentinians. But so to make it fair, congratulations, guys. And thanks a lot. Now, I'm going to make sure I have my volume high. I visited the TDAN headquarters and I had the opportunity to see this machine. And this machine has a great sound. It's like a machine gun. That's how they polish their retractor blades. Thanks a lot. And I'm going to stop sharing. There you go.
Thank you very much, doctor, for your presentation. Muchas gracias, doctor Terramani. Si alguno tiene alguna consulta, alguna pregunta, está disponible el chat. E inclusive luego de la presentación del doctor Janeiro están disponibles tanto las direcciones de Instagram como nuestra página. ¿Uno tiene alguna consulta? Si no, damos paso al doctor Janeiro y su presentación. Okay. From Ernesto Lombardo, asking for the lateral incision is always the left side. It's okay?
It doesn't have to be on the left side, but you got to be careful when you start doing it on the right side because you got the liver. So you got to be aware where the liver comes down. Usually the spleen's not in the way on the right side, but from lateral spine surgery, you can do either way. And it also depends. And I don't do a ton of lateral work. I have 2 of 22 surgeons that I do lateral approaches. I think a lot of it has to depend on where the defect is on the spine. Like, what is the easiest way to get into the spine? And you're going to want to pick that side. And, you know, you have the limitations in lateral surgery is the lower aspect of the rib cage. So you're going to be thinking about various anatomic issues of where you want to go, lateral left or lateral right. Can't hear you.
Sebastián, ¿quieres que ayude con la traducción de las preguntas? No te escuchamos, Sebastián.
Por favor, Claudia. Ahí el doctor Pablo Cirna está preguntando cuáles son los tips para colocar el ALIF en L2, L3.
So at 2-3, L2-3, I don't do A-lifts at L2-3 much anymore. I used to do anytime, I didn't care, but the 2-3 is tough. I think 2-3 is much more easier approached in the oblique corridor or in the direct lateral corridor. So in my world, I do anterior L5S1, L5S1, L4-5, L5S1, L4-5, and L3-4. I rarely do L2-3 anymore. So you can do it. You can do it retroperitoneal, or you can do it direct transperitoneal. But I prefer to do that oblique, ATP, or direct lateral.
There is another question they are asking. Dr. Daniel Agrelo is asking what would be the approach if there is a vascular damage?
So you don't want to have a vascular damage, but let's just say if you have a vascular issue, like a stent, if you have calcium, really bad calcium, I think in the last 3 years, I've actually kind of converted to doing some stuff obliquely in the ATP space. The beauty of being in the ATP space, which is anterior to psoas, is that you don't have to move the blood vessels off the anterior aspect of the spine as much. So you can still get a good cage in. You can get an ALIF cage in. You just have to be able to have an oblique attachment. You know, ALIF, typically your attachment is straight on. You have to be able to attach obliquely, usually about 40 degrees, and you can get that cage in obliquely, and you don't have to move the blood vessels off the anterior aspect of the spine. Now, it's a different thing if you're doing ALIF and you have a vascular injury. How do you manage that? And that's a whole different discussion. But in short, I don't go looking to put a stitch in. I take my fibular, I pack it, I put the Tidan retractor on, and we keep moving. My goal is to get the case done. And so if you start trying to mess around and fix that problem, you're going to make the hole bigger. There's going to be a shitload of bleeding, and you may not finish the spine case. So your goal, your mission, get the case done. So pack, put the retractor blade in. Hopefully that stops the bleeding. If you're bleeding, you have to fix the bleeding. But normally, if you put fibular, you put your retractor blade, you pack it off, you'll be able to complete the case and then deal with the bleeding after that. And usually the way I deal with the bleeding after that is if I have to, I go to a little bit more robust hemostatic agent like Everest, which is Johnson & Johnson, or Tacloseal, which is Baxter.
We have another question from Dr. Osberto de Leon. He's asking if the anterior approach is less costly than the posterior.
I think it is, because like I said, I did an ALIF L4-5 just now, 45 minutes, skin to skin, one device, 4 screws, done with the operation. I don't think there's too many spine surgeons in the world that can do a TLIF or a PLIF in 45 minutes. And hardware wise, I would venture to say, so also in the ALIF, no neuromonitoring. So we don't have to spend any money for neuromonitoring. The standard of care out here is about 50% of spine surgeons use neuromonitoring, which costs a lot of money to the hospital, costs a lot of money to the patient. So, and 50% do not use it. When you do a posterior operation, you're going to be using neuromonitoring. So I think pound for pound, the anterior operation is more cost efficient.
There is another question, but I think you answered that one already. It's from Dr. Marcelo Amaro. If you have a vascular injury, what are your tips for someone who is not a vascular surgeon?
This is a difficult problem because if you get into a bad vascular problem and you're not handling it well, it could turn into a nightmare. So most vascular problems are venous. So just picture this, venous injury. You start putting stitches in, you occlude the left iliac vein. The patient has massive DVT in the left lower extremity. Now you have to call orthopedics to do striker pressures. The compartment syndrome develops. You have to do 4 compartment fasciotomies because the patient's going to lose the leg. So that's a disaster. That patient is going to be negatively impacted by that operation. Another thing, you do a case and you rotate the artery and you occlude it. Now you have to do a thrombectomy. Maybe you embolize to the digital vessels of the toe and they lose 2 toes. So all those impacts, I mean, I don't think you have to be a vascular surgeon to do this, but you have to know how to deal with the blood vessels and you have to know how to manage that problem. And if you don't have that down solid, and if you don't, and you decide to do it, okay, but you better have a good relationship with your vascular surgeon. And you better be able to say, hey, Joe, come on in. I'm in trouble here, because if you don't have a good relationship, you know, it depends on the legal aspects. But in this country, a general surgeon who's doing anterior spine surgery, that's a perfect lawsuit. And I do a lot of medical legal expert work, and I see that. I always look, what kind of surgeon is he? General surgeon? And they didn't call a vascular surgeon in the room to take care of the problem. I'll tell the defense, settle this case. You're going to lose.
That's probably something very particular about Latin America, that in Latin America, we see a lot of general surgeons doing approaches, and they do it very well because there are not surgeons who are only doing approach, like it's the case in the States. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the problem with the States. I think I'm a general surgeon. I did 7 years of general surgery. And I did a lot of vascular in my general surgery. So if I didn't do vascular, I probably could be good at doing anterior spine work. But there's a lot of general surgeons that are coming out today. They do not do much vascular surgery. Mm-hmm. And they know how to do the laparoscope, but they can't do vascular surgery. And that's a problem.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Si quieren hacerla en vivo, también pueden hacerla. Bueno, yo quisiera aprovechar también y dar las gracias a todos los participantes de hoy en nombre de TIDAN, y también, por supuesto, a nuestro distribuidor en Argentina, South American Implants, al doctor Terramani y al doctor Janeiro por estarnos acompañando hoy aquí y ayudándonos pues a hacer llegar sus conocimientos a toda la comunidad latina, porque además de los doctores de Argentina, tenemos hoy aquí acompañándonos algunos otros doctores de América Latina. Entonces, muchas gracias a todos por su participación y a ti, Sebastián, por haber organizado esto.
Gracias, Claudia. Le damos el inicio al doctor Janeiro para que pueda hacer su presentación. Thank you very much, Dr. Terramani.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Bueno. ¿Aparece? ¿Aparece correcto en la pantalla? Sebastián, ¿se ve?
Perfecto, Ricardo.
¿Escucha bien
Ahí tenemos
también?
imagen. Sí, sí.
Buenísimo. Bueno, ha hecho una excelente presentación Tomás, así que yo solamente voy a hacer un mínimo resumen de los conceptos en español para los colegas que hablan español y fundamentalmente hablar de lo que me pediste que hiciera hincapié, que es la ventaja de las indicaciones, contraindicaciones, que también las ha nombrado inicio a este. Con respecto a los beneficios del abordaje, más que claro está que haciendo un abordaje anterior al lateral vamos a preservar fundamentalmente las estructuras que estabilizan la columna en vía posterior. Ese fue el gol estándar inicial por el cual se empezó a utilizar este tipo de abordaje, porque respetamos las estructuras de los complejos ligamentarios, cápsulas facetarias, y al abordar por vía anterior y lateral no disecamos los músculos posteriores, lo que evita la atrofia muscular posoperatoria, así como el dolor crónico consecuente a este abordaje, ¿no? ¿Cuál es la meta? La meta que queremos lograr es la disectomía completa y la colocación de un gran injerto con buen tamaño, sea por vía LIF o XLIF. ¿Qué hacemos con esto? Logramos remover la causa del dolor, logramos una gran superficie de fusión en el área de mayor carga espinal, el 90% de la superficie más o menos lo que ocupa una LIF o una LIF, en el área justamente que soporta el 80% de la carga axial. Esto nos permite dar un muy buen soporte y obviamente a mayor tamaño de la caja es menor el índice de subsidencia. Si lo comparamos obviamente en contraposición al TLIF o al PLIF. El abordaje tanto lateral como anterior obviamente nos permite corregir el alineamiento sagital y coronal, recuperar o mantener la lordosis que el paciente tenga. Y esto genera también un aumento del diámetro foraminal al restaurar la altura discal, lo que nos permite la descompresión radicular indirecta. Lo más importante quizá de todo este abordaje anterolateral en sus tres variantes es que no manipulamos las raíces. Y eso es no un dato menor, porque puede ocurrir en la vía posterior el colocar un PLIF o un TLIF para dar soporte anterior, debemos manipular muy cerca de las raíces. Esto está prácticamente descartado, salvo alguna maniobra muy poco feliz en la vía anterolateral. ¿Cuáles son las indicaciones de la LIF? Bueno, cualquier patología que requiera soporte anterior segmentario. Obviamente, esa la decide el cirujano ortopedista o el neurocirujano que haga la indicación de la cirugía. Tanto el doctor Terramani como yo nos dedicamos a hacer abordajes y las indicaciones en general las hace el cirujano espinal. Pero a grosso modo, y resumiéndolos, la enfermedad degenerativa discal, que se puede hacer en Stanalón o 360, revisión de cirugías posteriores que tienen pseudoartrosis para dar el soporte necesario, con o no reinstrumentación posterior. La espondilolistesis, de acuerdo al grado de espondilolistesis, se decidirá si es un espanalón, si es un grado 1, si es un grado más alto, el 360 también. Deformidades o inestabilidad severa que requieren fusión de 360 grados. Soporte anterior en construcciones posteriores largas, cuando van a ser escoliosis del adulto muy largas que van a terminar en T10 o en T4. Muchos cirujanos deciden colocar soporte anterior para habitualmente lograr una mejor base de sustentación y a lo mejor ahorrar tornillos ilíacos. Contraindicaciones. Las contraindicaciones fundamentalmente tienen que ver, como dijo el doctor Terramani, con las dificultades que podemos tener fundamentalmente en el abordaje. Yo las dividí en dos partes, las que corresponden al abordaje y a las que corresponden directamente a la técnica de LIF en sí. Las del abordaje, si uno ve una placa de abdomen, cuando piden inflexión, extensión o la tomografía, grandes calcificaciones, como en esta foto que puse en la presentación, obviamente contraindica, o por lo menos nos pone en aviso de tener que tener una cuidadosa técnica al momento de hacer la rotación y la retracción de los vasos para evitar accidentes de placa o trombóticos que puedan embolizar y generar un desastre vascular postoperatorio. La cirugía vascular previa bajo los mismos lineamientos. Si tenemos un stent aórtico en un aneurisma de aorta o en una ilíaca, puede dificultar justamente la retracción de los vasos o puede generar que el vaso directamente no se movilice. Entonces, para elegir una vía posterior pura y no arriesgarnos a intentar hacer un procedimiento fallido. Las cirugías abdominales previas va a depender de qué área fueron tomando. Los vaciamientos ganglionares retroperitoneales o cualquier otra cirugía extensa retroperitoneal puede generar muchas adherencias, y como las grandes complicaciones que tenemos para este abordaje son las que tienen que ver con el tratamiento de las venas y son las que más se afectan a las adherencias, hay que pensar previamente en esto. Un capítulo aparte tienen los trasplantes renales, que habitualmente se hacen con anastomosis de la vena renal y de la arteria renal bien bajas, a la altura justamente de la bifurcación o de la ilíaca, nos hacen pensar siempre en descartar esta vía. Y la infección espinal, sobre todo si hubo una discitis o una infección dentro de alguno de los cuerpos vertebrales, porque todo proceso infeccioso genera en el retroperitoneo un gran componente adheresial que puede uno arriesgarse hacia el abordaje, pero es preferible evitarlo porque sabe que hay una gran chance de que aumente exponencialmente la capacidad de lesionar alguna vena durante el procedimiento del abordaje. Contraindicaciones del implante en sí mismo son las fracturas vertebrales, los tumores vertebrales, la osteoporosis severa, porque va a producir por una discordancia de cargas o de presiones entre lo que es el PIC y lo que es el hueso que está aumentado en debilidad, va a generar generalmente una subsidencia o una ruptura del cuerpo vertebral que uno está tratando de recolocar o reposicionar. La infección, cayendo en las reglas generales de cualquier prótesis o implante en un paciente infectado, y el implante PLIF o TLIF muy posterior o en subsidencia importante. Estos casos yo los agregué, no los he visto en la literatura, pero en mi experiencia personal he visto que cuando el PLIF o el TLIF está muy posterior del 50% de la vértebra hacia atrás, es preferible sacarlo por la vía que fue colocado para evitar lesiones de la dura, o porque si está en subsidencia o muy posterior, para lograr abrir la cara anterior y retirar el PLIF o el TLIF, en general uno tiene que romper el cuerpo vertebral de uno de los dos platos para poder retirarlo. Y esto genera un daño que después el implante no va a poder cubrir y no vamos a poder lograr el gol estándar de la cirugía, que era recuperar la lordosis y lograr una buena superficie de apoyo. Visto las indicaciones y las contraindicaciones del implante fundamentalmente, las complicaciones que vamos a tener en general son siempre del abordaje. Como enumeró y fue hablando recién el doctor Terramani, las más importantes y las que aquejan a la mayor parte de los cirujanos sin experiencia tienen que ver con lesiones venosas o arteriales. Todas en general tienen que ver con estas patologías preexistentes, infecciones o patología arterial previa. Las neurológicas son raras, la de la eyaculación retrógrada que corresponde al nervio presacro de la Perget es rara, infrecuente y es cada vez más inusual en función del abordaje retroperitoneal. Las de la cadena simpática tienen que ver con el abordaje OLIF cuando no se identifica la cadena y no se la saca del campo correctamente. Y las demás son en general más del abordaje en sí, como la herida, también de factores predisponentes, tiene que ver la licencia con factores predisponentes como desnutrición o pacientes diabéticos o malos materiales que se utilizan o una probable infección de la herida. Cabe acá un capítulo aparte, las infecciones en la vía anterior, todos los cirujanos espinales que están escuchando están acostumbrados a operar cervicales y raramente, muy extrañamente, tienen infecciones. Y en la vía lateral de ALIF, en la lateral de XLIF o en la oblicua, también son sumamente raras. Y dependen generalmente de causas propias del paciente. Las lesiones del tubo digestivo o del uréter, si uno lo identifica durante la cirugía, son excepcionales. Y las hematológicas, como la trombosis venosa profunda o el hilio funcional, en general se ven solamente en los pacientes que se hace 360 grados en la misma cirugía. y tiene más que ver con los tiempos quirúrgicos prolongados que con el traumatismo directo durante la cirugía en la retracción. Bueno, eso es como vuelo de pájaro para lo que tiene que ver con indicaciones, contraindicaciones. Y puntualmente me pidieron que haga un poco de la descripción del nuevo implante que está trayendo South American Implants, el ALIF. Y acá voy a hacer algunas aclaraciones porque las prótesis son todas muy similares, pero tienen algunas cosas interesantes. Puntualmente, que tienen cajas hiperlordóticas, como vemos acá en la presentación. Voy a reducir las imágenes de todos. Ahí está. Para poder aclararles que, aparte de tener una amplia altura, las cajas en los dos tamaños, como se ve ahí, small y large, tienen también hiperlordóticas de 18 grados. Dos cajas hiperlordóticas de 18 grados nos pueden ayudar a corregir la lordosis en 4-5-5-1 con una muy buena sumatoria de ángulo. Tienen 3 disponibilidades de tornillos, los de 20, 25 y 30. 30 para pacientes más grandes, en general los de 20 y 25 son los más usados. Con respecto a la técnica vuelo de pájaro, vamos a comentar que obviamente la técnica implica la disectomía, como se ve en la primera diapositiva de la izquierda. Después, elegir el tamaño del cage que vamos a colocar, de acuerdo al logro que queremos dar de ángulo o de tamaño, tanto por vía ALIF como por vía OLIF. El probador y el implante, como se ve acá, tiene la posibilidad, perdón, ir para adelante. Ahí estamos, de tomar el cage, el mismo cage o el mismo probador para utilizarlo de las dos maneras, por el corredor lateral o por el corredor anterior, como estaba explicando recién el doctor Terramani. Otro dato interesante es que el colocador, como se ve en la diapositiva abajo a la izquierda, tiene un tope en la cara lateral donde toma al cage, que en el momento que uno introduce la caja no corre riesgo de meterla demasiado en profundidad, porque se apoya contra el esteofito o el borde anterior de la vértebra, y en vía lateral u oblicua también. Esto nos permite asegurar que uno puede impactar en un corredor chiquito con un abordaje pequeño sin correr riesgo de meter la prótesis demasiado profunda. Con respecto al método de acción, es otro improvement que tiene este ALIF en particular, que es que el colocador, como se ve en la primera diapositiva de arriba a la izquierda, tiene un canal de trabajo que está alineado con los tornillos, de manera tal que al poner la punta cuadrada, como se ve aquí en detalle, tanto recta como angulada, en este sector, nos permite asegurar que el ingreso de la punta cuadrada no vaya más allá de la profundidad necesaria, y el tornillo lo mismo, por el mismo canal de trabajo. Una cosa que ayudé a diseñar a los ingenieros de SAI, y que es interesante como herramienta también para evitar lesiones en el momento de colocar la punta cuadrada y el tornillo, es este tubo en canal de trabajo que encaja perfectamente con la unión del colocador y nos permite introducir la punta cuadrada hasta la profundidad precisa, y lo mismo con el tornillo. En el momento que uno introduce ese canal de trabajo, tanto el atornillador como la punta cuadrada hacen tope de manera tal que nunca se introduzca la punta cuadrada ni el tornillo más allá del lugar necesario. Por último, vamos a ver acá cómo queda colocada la prótesis, tanto a vista desnuda como en frente y en perfil radiológico. Y dos cosas que me interesaron mucho también de este case es que tiene un marcador posterior que sabemos que está a 3 milímetros del muro posterior, entonces en el perfil radiológico podemos asegurarnos dónde queda la parte posterior de la caja. Y otro detalle muy importante también, porque en algunos cases de otras empresas el tornillo es cilíndrico y no hace tope con la caja, y el tornillo puede pasarse y escaparse dentro del cuerpo. la base del tornillo que se hace fija en el implante es cónica, entonces llega un momento en el que se frena automáticamente y siempre queda bien ajustado por justamente que es cónica. El uso de este cage es muy versátil también en cuanto al sistema de pinzas y de extractor para hacer la disectomía, cosa que junto con el separador de TIM nos permite hacer un procedimiento sumamente rápido en los tiempos estándar que montó el doctor Terramani, de 30 a 45 minutos para hacer cada nivel. Y si uno va sumando un nivel, se suman 10, 15 minutos más, así que un doble nivel aproximadamente nos lleva unos 60 minutos de piel a piel. Así que, si hay preguntas, podemos ya pasar a las mismas.
Gracias, Ricardo, por la presentación. Hay una pregunta del doctor Fabricio Medina que quería saber si se utilizan profilaxis antitrombótica y en caso de que así sea, si es en todos los pacientes o solo en algunos grupos, usando enoxaparina o alguna otra droga.
Tomás?
So normally, I do not use a DVT prophylactic heparin or Lovenox or aspirin. So what we use typically is leg squeezers, just sequential compression devices. And during surgery, I don't use any anticoagulation. But if there's a blood vessel I'm concerned about, I will give patients 100 units of heparin per kilogram for 30 minutes, whatever time I'm concerned, and then I reverse the heparin with protamine. So if I'm concerned that I'm going to potentially thrombose that vessel, I will give heparin, and it's safe. There's one paper published on that use, but in general, no anticoagulation.
Thank you. Tomás, hay otra pregunta del doctor Osberto de León, que pregunta sobre si la técnica implica ver el ligamento longitudinal posterior para evitar empujar material discal al canal espinal.
So it is amazing that the ability, when you look at the MRI or the CT scan and you say, I have a herniated segment, right side, paracentral or not even paracentral, right side. And if you distract the disc, so you can have a little compression of the disc, you distract a little bit and you go back there posteriorly with the microscope or with loops, you're able to do a direct decompression. The spine surgeons that I work with that believe in that, almost 100% of the time, they decompress anteriorly. There are some spine surgeons that are kind of scared. They don't want to go back there. And so they will put the cage in, they will flip the patient, and then they'll decompress posteriorly. That's okay. I don't force them to do it, but you can do a lot of that work anteriorly. And usually, by definition, if you have a herniated disc, your PLL is already damaged. The PLL is already torn. So when you open up the disc space a little bit and you look, you'll see the defect. And then the trick is to have a nerve hook. And the nerve hook that we use most of the time is a nerve hook. And at the end, there's a little ball bearing. It's a little ball at the end. And so when they put it past the PLL, they can grab the disc and pull it out. So it's very possible to do.
Thank you. El doctor Daniel Agrelo pregunta sobre la preparación intestinal para la vía anterior, para la LIF, si es necesaria una ayuda.
¿Qué es una ayuda?
Help. Is needed any help?
¿Ayudar para qué?
For preparation intestinal for the anterior, yes.
Okay, yeah, I got you now. No es necesario. Que yo dice a los pacientes en general, if you are constipated before surgery, so yo miro a las pacientes en mi clínico, 30% I see before surgery. 70%, I don't know who they are. It could be a monkey. It could be a gorilla. I don't care. So 30% of the patients I see, I say, if you have constipation before surgery, it's going to be a problem. So I say, make sure you take laxatives, magnesium citrate. I don't care. You don't want to be constipated when you come into surgery. But when I do the retroperitoneal approach and I pull everything over and I can feel the stool in the colon, I usually tell the spine surgeon, make sure you put this patient on bowel protocol because he is full of shit. So, but in general, I don't do a bowel prep.
Thank you. El doctor Pablo Cirna pregunta si ambos cirujanos coinciden en el tipo de sutura y tipo de cierre en caso de necesidad de reparación de arteria ilíaca o vena ilíaca.
Tell me in English. I got some of it, but explain it.
So the question is if both surgeons, the spine and the approach surgeon, are okay with the same type of suture and type of closure that they will be performing on the iliac or artery.
Okay, so no es necesario usar suture on the iliac artery or vein. Now, wait, I shouldn't say that. If you have an iliac artery hole injury, you're going to put a suture in it. It's a Prolene, right? That's it, period. Because arterial injury, you usually need to put a suture. Now, you can use Everest and Tacloseal for arterial injuries. It's indicated. It works. I've done it. But in general, if I have a hole in an artery, that's easy as a vascular surgeon. I grab it, I put a stitch in. Maybe I use a pledget. Maybe I don't use a pledget. A pledget is a little Teflon piece. But in general, veins don't need suture. Veins, hemostatic patch. Now, if you're going to use a suture on a vein, any vessel, artery or vein, it's Prolene. I use 4-O-Prolene on a RB1 needle. I like my needle to be a real quick turn because my incision's small, 5 centimeters. So I don't have a lot of room to do if I use an SH needle, I got to do a big turn to get that needle in. So if I use an RB1, a real tight needle, I can make the turn, just a real quick turn with my wrist, and I can repair it. In general, I don't use suture on injuries.
Coincido, en 100% de las veces que uno puede tener un pequeño sangrado venoso, el uso de un parche hemostático, Surgicel fibrilar o un Espongostan, comprimir, seguir con el procedimiento, terminar de colocar el ALIF y eventualmente, si no paró, el punto de Prolene 4 ceros es el que usualmente utilizamos, así que es misma sutura y mismo estrategia, digamos, para el manejo. Y en la arteria, obviamente, hay que suturarla con o sin parche de Prolene o de Gore-Tex o el material que tengamos para usar. Pero como última instancia, la sutura.
Perfecto, Ricardo, muchas gracias. Ahí pregunta Matías Crescente si siempre hay que bloquear el implante.
Esa es una pregunta para un cirujano espinal, en realidad. Pero yo lo que te puedo contar después de 20 años de hacer abordajes es que las únicas cajas que yo he visto que hayan hecho balconeo, como le digo yo, o sea, que hagan prosidencia anterior o se muevan hacia adelante, tienen que ver con que no han tenido algún método de sustentabilidad, tornillos o quilla. Inclusive en algunas con quilla, con paciente con hueso osteoporótico, he visto prosidencia de la caja hacia adelante. No querría nombrar cuáles, pero hay un par de cajas en mercado que no tienen sostén de ninguna naturaleza y hemos resuelto ese tema colocando por el orificio donde se colocan un pequeño tornillo oblicuo para darle un sostén. Porque si no es la micromovilidad del espacio, sobre todo si es standalone, hace que se mueva hacia adelante.
I have a question for Ricardo. So mi cuestión para ustedes, and I didn't understand because mi español es mezza, così. You talked about the TLIF and the PLIF and maybe a contraindication to do an ALIF to remove the device.
Yes.
And my question is, I have about 150, maybe 200. I know it's 150, maybe 200 cases where we take the cage out anteriorly, TLIF, usually TLIF, and it's successful. And I think I understand what you're saying. I agree. If the cage is very, very posterior, it's better to pull it out posterior. But if the cage is in the disc space, that even if it's subsidence, I think the power of the anterior spine approach is you can take the cage out and you can put in a big cage and get a better result anterior than any other approach. And I just was curious on.
Yes, I agree. It's the same. But in a few cases, when it's too posterior, I prefer not to pull out from the anterior approach. But I understand that even if you can't extract the PLIF or the TLIF by the anterior approach, you can push into the body of up or inferior plate and put a big cage, and but usually we could extract the PLIF without any trouble.
I agree, and it's I think that's very important for anybody on this conference call that is approach surgeon. The spine surgeon, sometimes they get too excited. They go, oh, whoa, let's take it out anteriorly. But if the cage is posteriorly in the canal, you have to say no.
Yes.
That case has to be done posterior.
Yes.
I agree, 100%. Cool.
El doctor Amaro asking, what kind of graft do you prefer for filing the cage?
For what?
What kind of graft do you
for
prefer?
filling.
Yes, for filling the cage.
CSA, you know, crazy. I mean, I got people putting in a BMP, Trinity. Some guys are putting a needle in the disc, into the iliac crest and pulling the bone, pulling the blood out of the iliac crest and then spin it down and then inject the precipitate into the graft. There's a lot of different things. I factor is another. I mean, it's so variable. I think the beautiful thing about the ALIF is that I don't care if whatever you put in there, you're going to typically fuse. And I think it's important as a spine surgeon to try to reduce the cost to the hospital, because if you put stuff in there that's very expensive, now your operation costs go up. So you have to kind of find a balance of what you're putting in the cage.
Ok, Ricardo, el doctor Daniel Agrelo pregunta si hay prosidencia, si queda material discal en una disectomía incompleta.
Usualmente no lo vemos, porque en general tenemos, como dijo el doctor Tomás hace un momento, cuando uno distrae bien el espacio, puede ver completamente el ligamento común posterior e inclusive retirar algún segmento que esté por debajo del ligamento y por detrás del límite del muro posterior. Pero la prosidencia hacia el espacio obviamente es un defecto de técnica. Es cuando uno no hizo completamente la disectomía. Entonces cuando pones el cage, evidentemente hay un principio físico, no puede haber dos cuerpos en el mismo punto del universo. Entonces si vos empujás la caja y dejaste disco, probablemente lo empujes hacia el foramen, y eso sí es un problema. Por eso hay que tener cuidado de ir con la cureta y con las pinzas pituitarias hacia los corners y ir a buscar el segmento que pueda proceder.
Eso es muy importante. Es muy importante, cirujanos, exposure, general, vascular, whatever, cardiothoracic, que usted también use sus ojos, disculpe mi español, usted mira, porque si usted no limpia el disco correcto y limpia todo, yo mido a veces, empuja and it goes into the canal. And he's Ricardo's 100% correct. Necesita limpiar y mirar atrás que todo está. Eso no se puede hacer eso. You cannot clean a disc space out anterior any other way. Anterior is the best way you're going to look and clean out the disc space. So cuando yo I don't work with cirujanos que no hace buen trabajo limpiando la disc space. Yo no quiero estar metido con un cirujano que es sloppy and isn't completo in cleaning out the disc space. It's very important. Anterior.
Es una manera de preservar la técnica y que no ocurra como pasó con el Total Disc Replacement, que lo sobreindicaban y al final el método murió por sobreindicación.
Yep, 100%.
Hay otra consulta del doctor Medina sobre si es posible resecar la porción extraforaminal de una HD mediante la vía anterior.
¿De una?
HD.
Hernia discal.
Hernia discal.
Sí, como dijo el doctor Terramani, cuando uno hace una buena distracción del lado contralateral, obviamente, al que está explorando, con el hook del palpador de nervio, ese bolita que hizo referencia, o con una pituitaria delicada, uno puede resecar las hernias de disco, porque uno aumenta mucho la altura del espacio y suele encontrar el orificio donde el ligamento posterior está roto y rescatar ese segmento. Salvo que sea demasiado grande y muy extruido, en cuyo caso seguramente hubieran ellos abordado por vía posterior, previamente, antes de colocar el alivio. Porque la sintomatología hubiera hecho eso.
Eso es the nerve hook. So it's a nerve hook that works. It's basically you grab up top, and then at the bottom it has a little, like maybe 2 millimeter ball bearing. And they can use it in there, and they rotate it around in the disc space right below the PLL.
Muchas gracias. Hay otra consulta también sobre algún tip para la resección de este segmento extraforaminal en la hernia de disco.
Justamente lo que dijo Tomás recién.
Lo que explicaron recién.
Tomarlo con el hook para que se aproxime hacia el ligamento común posterior, y si uno tiene lupas o microscopio, obviamente es mucho mejor que a ojo desnudo, pero con una pituitaria delicada ya lo podés tomar y traerlo. La idea es acercarlo hacia el defecto del ligamento y luego retirarlo hacia adelante. Lo he visto muchas veces. Ya de por sí, cuando uno distrae el espacio, el ligamento que estaba bombado se tensa y acerca lo que puede estar distraído hacia el espacio de raquidio y es más fácil de traerlo. Cuanto mayor distracción tengas, mejor posibilidad, obviamente, de traer el espacio. El segmento del hernia de disco.
Perfecto. Consultan sobre si el uso del hook del gancho es igual en las hernias cervicales.
Eso ya es terreno específico de los cirujanos espinales.
Yeah, I don't do cervical work.
Me neither.
Es una afirmación, no es una pregunta. Acá están aclarando.
Ok. Básicamente, la cirugía cervical y la lumbar son lo mismo, la única diferencia es el tamaño. Nosotros estamos en un espacio mucho más grande que el que trabajan ellos. Deberían sentirse más cómodos con nosotros porque ven más fácil las cosas.
Creo que no hay más consultas. Les agradecemos tanto al doctor Janeiro como al doctor Terramani por este webinar. Muchas gracias a todos los participantes. Gracias Claudia de TIDAM y Eduardo Asturias. Creo que ha salido más que bien y damos por finalizado. Si alguno quiere agregar algo, estaríamos finalizando ya este webinar. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you, everyone.